where we will be joined by a truly amazing guest, Roslyn Peric from Cairns, Australia. Welcome, Roslyn. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right, so Roslyn, you at the moment you are working as a rescuer and rehabilitator at the Bat Reach facility in Cairns, where you take care of rescued and injured flying foxes, and also you're actively involved in conservation efforts to protect what is definitely one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on our planet, namely the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Eastern Australia. But now, to start our interview, I was thinking that we could go all the way back to the very beginning, because when I look at your background, like, I see that you graduated, at least for first time, in 2015 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts.
Yes,
that
is
had
correct.
little, if nothing, to do with what you're doing right now. So how did that came about, and what actually drove you to switch to a completely different field eventually?
I guess, well, like, growing up, I lived in a lot of really spectacular places and really always enjoyed nature, always was super interested in animals. But through high school, I guess what resonated with me most was art. I didn't have a strong maths or science background, and art was just what came naturally to me. And I decided pretty early on in high school that fine art was what I was going to pursue at a university level, and really focused, for the last 2 years, really focused all of my energy in on that. And was successful in getting into my first choice university, which is a very well acclaimed fine art school in Melbourne. And really enjoyed my time there. But for most of it, I was thinking, once I finish this, I would love to do medicine, or anatomy and pathology have always really interested me. But I was afraid that I would never get the grades to get into that. And also, it's like another 8 years of study. Then after I finished my first degree, I moved from Melbourne up here to Cairns and started working on a boat, going out to the reef every day. And it just clicked, like, my love of the ocean and a lot of things that I guess I had been removed from while I'd been living in Melbourne, living in a big city and being really disconnected from nature. I guess I sort of forgot about all my childhood passions, of like going and finding frogs and identifying insects and things like that. So I looked into it. I went back to uni to study marine biology, and then about a year in, decided to transfer to environmental practice, just for better employment prospects and to do something a little bit broader. I know marine bio is so competitive these days. Like, finding a job doing the fun stuff is really difficult. So I thought I'd cut my losses and transfer, and it's also given me the time to do the other things that I love. So working with the bats and doing my job, which is with Reef Restoration Foundation. So I feel very lucky to be able to fit, study and work and other passions into life at the moment. I think that's a really good balance, which I feel very lucky for.
And yeah, this is also another thing I was thinking about, is that, like, well, as you know all too well, in our field there is a huge pressure on getting as many accomplishments as you can in the shortest time possible. So everything is like, by the time you're 22, you should have done this and this and that, and by the time you're 25, you should have been there and there. So considering that you started off in a completely different directions and moved to the environmental side of things only eventually, like, did you face like exceeding pressures and expectations from peers and professors, since perhaps your peers were younger than yourself, since they started right after, immediately in that field?
Yeah, it was difficult when I first started marine biology, being with all these like 19 and 20-year-olds who had just finished high school and were like really high achievers. And that was another thing that made me transfer out, was just like looking at the caliber of students that I was going to be competing with. I was just like, I can't do this. I will never be at the top of classes where maths is involved. Like my brain doesn't do maths. So instead of putting myself up for like repetitive failures at the hands of, losing job opportunities or career options to, my peers who are all younger and seemingly like more accomplished and more successful, I just thought, this isn't for me. Like, I might as well do something else that focuses on my strengths rather than things that I'm always going to struggle with. But yeah, I think there's definitely room for older people to come into things later on. Like, you bring life experience with you, which is something that, having to do group work and stuff at uni, I really notice younger students, and not to generalize, like it's not all younger students, but I tend to notice like their lack of organization and just general wishy-washiness that I'm like, you will never survive if you keep this up. Like, granted, they might be first, second year students, but I feel like high school these days doesn't really prepare people for taking on responsibility for their own academic success. I see so many first, second year students who kind of don't have any clue what they're doing. And I feel lucky as well that I got all that out of the way in my first degree. All the mucking around and, just having fun and failing subjects. Like, I really don't want to do that this time around. My GPA is good and I want to keep it that way.
Yeah, feeling lucky to have gotten high school out of the way is definitely a relatable sensation. So yeah, because indeed, no, that's also you think that, at least I hate the turn of phrase like back in your day or back in my day. I absolutely hate it, but still, so you see some kind of like general worsening of education, of the quality of education, at least in Australia, of course, compared to when you were in high school.
Yeah. Although granted, I did go to like an alternative high school for my last 5 years of high school education. I was at it's sort of like a Montessori or a Steiner school. So from a very young age, we were taught to be accountable for our learning and our own success, which I think is vastly different to the general high school experience in Australia, where, if you don't bring your homework in, you get a detention and you get a letter sent home and a slap on the wrist or whatever. Whereas when you're at university, like, no one's going to remind you to do your homework. No one's going to, be there to chase you up and remind you that you have things to do. You've kind of got to take all those responsibilities on for yourself. And I think a lot of younger students struggle with that. I think there's definitely also a lot to be said for like the life experience that you can bring to a degree if you're a little bit older. And I think that shows through in your work. Being asked to consider, social contexts and things like that is obviously a little bit easier if you've lived out in the broader world for a while, not just in your parents' basement or something.
So yeah, indeed. Now let's dive in deep into what you actually do. So indeed, you've started in recent years. You started working, like, diversifying in a way, in the sense that alongside the work in the Great Barrier Reef, which we will get back to shortly, you have began working indeed at a bat rehabilitation center in Cairns. And now, when I say bats, to the people in the audience, when I say bats, I don't mean like teeny tiny insectivorous bats. I mean flying foxes, which are basically huge furry dragons, scouring through the skies of the southern hemisphere. So, yeah, how does how, what's how did that come to be? Because I mean, bats are so much different from anything marine that it's hard to see a link between the two.
Yeah, it is. And I think it sort of shocked a lot of people who'd followed me on Instagram or followed my journey into marine biology and stuff, which I was so passionate about. And then to suddenly pivot to flying mammals, I think threw some people off. But I guess I've just really always loved bats. I've had a passion for them since I can remember. They've been one of my favorite animals.
They are
And
so underrated.
they are. They're so intelligent. Like, they are just fantastic creatures. And actually knowing that there was a colony of them in the center of town was one of the things that tipped the scales for me to move up to Cairns. Just the opportunity to be so close to them. And, I guess I always had in the back of my mind being able to work with them. Performing rescues or caring for them was, I guess, a long-term goal of mine that came true at the end of last year, after doing a little under a year of training at Bat Reach in handling bats and just getting used to them, getting used to treating them for like minor ailments and things like that. It has enriched my life like so much. Aren't flying foxes mostly non-aggressive, although they are large and intimidating? Yes, flying foxes are not really aggressive at all. They will have little fights between each other over, I guess, territory almost. Like, they like to have space around them while they're eating. So if another flying fox comes too close to, especially a male, who while he's eating, they'll have a little tiff and kind of be like, you get away from me. And that's generally the noise that a lot of people are like, they're so noisy, but it's those little interactions that they have when they're feeding and also when they're mating. There's a lot of screaming that happens. But flying foxes are definitely not aggressive. If they ever bite people or scratch people accidentally, it's usually a fear response. Like, if a flying fox is grounded, they can't take off from the ground. They have to be hanging in order to drop down into flight. So if you come across a grounded flying fox, it is likely really, really stressed and scared. And if you try and pick it up, it probably will bite you, just because that's their nature. And their teeth is the only thing that they have to defend themselves with. So, yes.
And yeah, now to something, perhaps the most wholesome component of the interview, because recently you have literally raised two baby bats all by yourself in your home first, and then at Bat Reach from tiny pups to nearly adults at the right now, if I'm not mistaken. So how does that even does that even work? Like, how do you rear an animal that is from a different species that is not human, and what should you do and not do when it comes to this degree of responsibility, because this animal's life literally depends on you.
Yes. It is a huge responsibility, and there were painful moments, like having to wake up at 2 a.m. to feed them for the first couple of weeks was not enjoyable. But you do what you have to so that they can survive and thrive. And I guess it's sort of one of my favorite parts, I guess, is that flying fox pups actually need a fair bit of interaction and love and affection because they get that from their mother. They have such strong maternal bonds that as a carer, your job is to provide that support and that nurturing and that love. obviously it can only be up to a certain stage. You don't want to like imprint on them and have them be unreleasable. So up until about 8 weeks or 10 weeks is when you can be really like hands-on with them. And then you have to slowly start pulling back and reducing the amount of contact you have, which was hard, like really, really hard. But it's, you know, it's for their benefit. It's their lives at stake. And obviously you want to do everything you can for their care to have been successful. And for me, successful is not just them not dying on you. Successful to me is that they reach the stage of release and can be returned to the wild. I think there's definitely not specifically with bats, but I see with other wildlife, people tend to really overmother certain animals, which leads to them being unreleasable. And then they become a burden on wildlife carers because they've got these permanent animals in care. And I find that, yeah, a bit distressing and a bit upsetting when I see it happening. And then there's things like I work with gliders a little bit as well. And they're really, really popular in the exotic pet trade. And you just always see viral videos online of like cute glider behavior. And it's like something completely unnatural they're being forced to do because it looks funny. So, yeah, that's something that I really try to stay away from. Yeah.
No, yeah, that's exactly what I was going to bring up next. So you said that there is a very thin line between properly taking care of an animal and in the with its release in the wild in mind, and over mothering it to the point where it gets imprinted and cannot be released anymore. So where where do you how do you find that line? Like what kind of signals do you have to focus on to see where the limit lies?
I guess like the main thing that you can do is try and replicate a mother's behavior or a mother's attention, but not overstep that. Um, and, you know, like things like, I mean, I had wildlife carers who were bringing their animals to school, to university, and bringing them into labs while we're sitting there doing dissections and stuff, which I just thought was like, I think at the core of every decision that you make, the animal's best interest has to be there, not your own best interest or what looks cool or what's going to get attention or fame or whatever for you. Um, I think some wildlife carers aren't capable of putting the animal's needs first. I find that really sad when I see that happening. And it's sort of like you have to follow the mother, like what a mother would do, I guess. So it comes down to being familiar with the animal that you're raising, to a certain extent, and familiar with their habits and their lifestyle. So we have some possums in care that spend so much time with their mothers. Even when they're like 12 months old, they'll be hanging off mum's back and they're like the same size as her. Whereas there are other species that are a lot more independent. So we give them a lot more space. Don't pick them up and cuddle them and handle them really, because that's, although it would be really cute and it would be enjoyable for the human, it's just not in the animal's best interest. So you just don't do it really.
So yeah, that also sheds light on how a wildlife rehabilitation center operates. Because again, what kind of facilities do you have to build? Do you have to construct in order to house the animals properly and make sure that don't get stressed or too habituated to captivity, so that again that can jeopardize their release into the wild once they're ready.
Yeah. I guess it's all like husbandry is really important. So it's about providing an enclosure that has characteristics of their natural environment, and making it as close as, while still being as safe as possible for them, making it as close to their natural environment as possible. Obviously, with bats, that's quite hard to do because we can't put them up in the treetops. You can bring them flowers and things, which they really enjoy. They love being brought fresh flowers. But yeah, I think giving them aspects of what they would experience in the wild is really important, especially for orphans who've never experienced trees and foliage and things like that. It's important to give them stuff to climb around on and to swing off. So we give them toys, and like I've recently bought some licky mats, which are little silicone mats for dogs, and the bats just go absolutely batshit for them.
Pun
I
intended, I
smear like
suppose.
honey and pawpaw on it, just like rub it in, and because it's really similar to the licking action that they do to get nectar out of flowers. It's like stimulating the part of their brain that is activated when they feed, and it gives them something to do that is actually beneficial because it's what they do in nature. So I always love seeing them play with their enrichment toys.
And then, oh yeah, I definitely, I can definitely believe that, and I enjoy watching the highlights that you share on social media of those bats like licking themselves until like there's no tomorrow, and
Yeah.
yeah, eating, devouring, devouring any flower or fruit or anything that you present them with. They really are so cute. I mean, which then brings me to the flip side of the coin, because like we love bats, but not everyone does, and I mean, no judgment involved in that. It's a matter of taste, unless it actually results in persecution of bats
Yeah.
by people, and this is perhaps a very important point at the moment, especially because right now bats are being faulted for causing the pandemic, which, by the way, to everyone in the audience, is absolute nonsense. But so
Yes.
how does the relationship of between bats and people look like in the area you work at? So do people hate bats or consider them dirty or bringer the disease vectors, or is there some sort of more peaceful coexistence in place?
The situation is pretty terrible right now. There's a dispersal taking place, and basically, the regional council here has been trying to get rid of the colony for the better part of 20 years. They really hate them, and all of the media coverage and all of the like government releases and things that happen just serve to perpetuate fear of diseases, because we do have ABLV, which is Australian bat lyssavirus. That is the closest virus that we have in Australia to the rabies virus. So it is quite serious, it's deadly, and I think it's only killed 3 people in the last 25, 30 years, but the risk is there. Obviously, to work with any bats or flying foxes, you have to be vaccinated against rabies, as it stops ABLV. But the perception that they are diseased and that they are, virus vectors, is definitely a strong one. A lot of people believe it. Even, younger generation, that's not just the boomers and the old farmers who want to shoot them. It's the younger generations as well, because that's what they've been, inducted into. So the situation in Cairns is really pretty dismal. We have people that shoot at bats with BB guns and gel blasters and high pressured hoses, and you know, whenever there's a media release from one of the organisations that I work with, all the Facebook comments are just filled with people being like, "Bats are, bloody disgusting. Burn them all and shoot them out of the trees. They're bloody diseased flying rats and just people making ridiculous claims. It's very in your face how hateful people are towards them, which I guess is very different to Melbourne. It's a much more old fashioned sort of stance, whereas in Melbourne they're quite accepted, and people even travel to where they roost to go and see them as a tourist experience. Whereas up here, people are just like, kill them all. So it's quite heartbreaking, and I think that encouraged me more to work with them and try and change people's perception of them.
Yeah, again, the what you mentioned, the flying rat label is, well, in quite a lot of languages, the word for bat is literally flying mouse or flying rat,
Yes,
and that always that sometimes that really annoys me, because I mean, first of all, bats have nothing to do with rodents. They are a completely different order, and
exactly.
even when it comes to diseases, like the belief that bats bring viruses or bring bacteria is not entirely, like you said, because of course they can carry some zoonoses, but it is largely a myth. Like, they are not nearly as much of a disease vectors as other animals. Like, even cats bring more
Exactly.
diseases than bats.
Yes. And there's this misconception as well that you can catch diseases from their urine and their feces. Like you can catch deadly ABLV if you get pooed on by a bat, which is just absolutely not true. But that's one of the things that led to this
Yeah.
dispersal happening in Cairns, is because people didn't like walking underneath the trees where they roosted, because there was the perception of disease, according to the council. And that perception of disease amongst tourists was what they believe causing harm to the city's reputation, which is all bullshit. A lot of tourists actually enjoyed coming to the city to photograph them at night as they would fly out. So by claiming that they were doing it for tourists, it's like, were they or weren't they? They kind of shot themselves in the foot, because, as you know, bats are really important pollinators, and we sit on the border of two World Heritage natural wonders, one of them which is pollinated by flying foxes. And without the flying foxes, the Daintree rainforest disappears. And then we're not going to have any tourists coming to see it. So the whole idea of removing wildlife to make it a better experience for tourists is just so backwards to me. Like, people come to Australia to see the wildlife, to see like the crocodiles and the sharks and the snakes, but it's also
Oh
our
yeah.
mammals.
Yeah, I can definitely, again, I can definitely vouch for that too, because that's definitely that's the main reason why I traveled to Cairns last year, and it was totally worth it. The bats were definitely played a big part in it. We passed through a huge tree where every single square inch of wood was covered in like bats hanging down, in flying foxes hanging down and
Yeah.
waiting to take flight as soon as the sun would set. And then again, you mentioned, and indeed this was going to be my next question again. So yeah, basically you're reading my mind. That bats
I'm
are
good at that.
important. That flying foxes are important pollinators, and I think this is something that at least someone in the audience might be surprised about, because when we think of pollinators, we usually imagine bees or butterflies at most, so tiny little insects, not like bats with a 50-centimeter wingspan. So how do bats pollinate? Like, how does that work?
So, like I mentioned before, they largely feed on flowers in the wild. So, they are pollen and nectar eaters. They do eat native rainforest fruits as well, which they disperse the seeds of through their feces. Um, but with pollen and nectar, they actually, because they have really fuzzy little faces and fuzzy chests, as they get in there to lick out the nectar, they are getting pollen all over their fur. And then when they move to the next tree or onto the next bunch of flowers, they cross pollinate. And because they're capable of flying, upwards of 30 kilometers a night, they are our only rainforest long-distance seed dispersers.
So indeed, from what you say, it looks like they are really a keystone species for the survival of the daintree rainforest, which by the
Absolutely.
way, for the audience, is literally the most ancient rainforest in the world. Like it was there, it's been there since the early Jurassic or something like that. So yeah,
Yeah, it's insanely old. It is the longest surviving tropical rainforest on the planet.
yes,
So
thank you.
it's been around longer than
I
the
think the word is
Amazon.
better.
It might not be as big, but it is ancient.
And a big part of its survival is rests with the pollinating action of bats.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, this is definitely something that thank you for emphasizing that, because it kind of brings things into perspective to think that yeah, if we remove them, then the whole texture of yeah, plants and animals that live with them might, if not collapse, at least be seriously affected for the worse.
Yeah, definitely. If we were to lose flying foxes, like entire ecosystems would suffer. And another part of what's so sad about it is that one of the reasons that they're considered like a pest species now is because they're moving closer towards people because their habitat is being destroyed. So people are always like, well, they never used to live in the middle of town. And it's like, yeah, because they used to have rainforest to live in. You've cut it all down for fucking cane farms. So where are they supposed to go? Obviously, they're going to move to the nearest, suitable habitat, which just so happens to be in the center of town. So we really, through land clearing and agriculture, have created this terrible situation for them. And now they're being shooed away from the only place that they have. It's a really, really shitty state of affairs. It makes me quite angry.
I can definitely imagine, and of course, like we all hope that the local government will realize how valuable these flying animals are for the city, not only for the ecosystem but for the city as well, like you said. And for now, let's move back to the marine side of things, because at least perhaps for flying foxes, yeah, perhaps not many people outside of Australia are aware of the dangers they face and their importance for the ecosystem. But when it comes to the Great Barrier Reef, everyone in the world has at least heard about it once
Yes.
or twice in their lives. So indeed, the Great Barrier Reef is an insane biodiversity hotspot. Like it houses so many species of not only fish but any sort of marine life you can imagine. And everyone knows that it is under serious threat. But what exactly are these threats? Like, what is putting the Great Barrier Reef survival in danger?
I would say the biggest threat is climate change. We have rising water temperatures and ocean acidification, which both result in coral bleaching. Obviously, bleaching doesn't necessarily equate to death. However, if the conditions that cause bleaching are maintained for consecutive weeks, mass coral die-offs will occur. Now, the other thing that generally impacts the reef pretty negatively as well is water quality. So, because we have a lot of agriculture down the east coast of Australia, a lot of nitrates and like insecticides and pesticides and things get flushed out. And when you live in a region where there is such high rainfall as we have here, like in the last 4 days, we've had half a meter of rain. It really means that all the topsoil and stuff, if farming is not done sustainably and mindfully, a lot of topsoil gets washed out, and all those chemicals have been found inside coral polyps. So they've actually done testing to see what different chemicals affect fish and corals. And yeah, it really doesn't look good. Like when you've got really hardcore industrial insecticides and things cropping up in a World Heritage Marine Park, it doesn't bode well for anyone. And then there's also the issue of commercial fishing. Like a lot of people think that the Great Barrier Reef would be exempt from any commercial fishing, but there's actually only about 30% of the marine park that is off limits to fishing vessels. So we do still have things like gillnet fisheries and shark fisheries operating within the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, which I think is a bit fucked up, frankly. Sorry to swear, but
Oh no,
it's
don't worry about that.
yeah, it really makes me angry because like like a couple of documentaries that have come out recently attacking industrial fishing.
Ooh, here we
Um,
go.
you know, there does need to be something done about the rates of bycatch. We have gillnet fisheries operating that are not reported. They either don't report or they underreport their bycatch limits. And there's no surveillance and no sort of enforcement of these laws that we have in place to stop bycatch from occurring. So it's kind of a shitty situation where nothing's being done, which frustrates me a lot.
And yeah, so indeed, for the especially for the issue of coral bleaching, which is basically when the I think, at least correct me if I'm wrong, when the corals lose their algae that live symbiotically with them and supply them with nutrients via photosynthesis and stuff. So the algae
Yes.
then die off, and the coral then becomes white, so bleached, because they give corals their color. So I remember watching following on your social media accounts when you participated in coral restoration efforts. So you were basically replanting corals in degraded areas, and indeed it was astounding to see like how quickly corals can recover if given a chance and given the right conditions. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Go
how does that like considering if you were to literally convince people that the Great Barrier Reef can still be saved, I think that would be a great opportunity, because again, we are destroying it, and that's for sure. But so how is it possible that even in an area that has become a wasteland, well, a waste water bottom, so to say,
on.
yeah, sorry, we can still like restore it to the situation it was before. Like how does that work? Like how are corals so resilient and so able to bounce back from such catastrophic disturbances?
Well, I think one of the important things to remember is that corals have been around for millions of years. So some of them are incredibly resilient, and what the work that I do focuses on is heat resilient corals that have survived the last 3 bleaching events that we've had on the Great Barrier Reef, and then taking cuttings from those corals to grow more colonies from those fragments. So I guess it's not really correct to say that we think coral restoration will save the Great Barrier Reef, because it really is like a band-aid fix. We need government action on climate change. We need regulations to do with water quality, and we need stricter laws over uses of the marine park, such as not allowing commercial fishing and things like that. But yeah, it's something that works in the short term and it can buy us time, but it can't fix the problem completely. That's something that's really important to stress, is that restoration efforts are temporary fixes, and they're to sort of protect biodiversity and stop coral losses being any more severe than they are, and to try and sort of accelerate growth in those heat tolerant corals. But it's, yeah, restoration efforts alone won't save the Great Barrier Reef. We really need more significant government action globally, not just in Australia, because it's the combined, effects of every nation's emissions that are driving climate change. If Australia acts on our emissions, but other countries don't, obviously it's not going to have a great impact.
Yeah, so basically, here as well as for the flying foxes, I think from what you explained, the bottom line is that there is no easy fix, at least not anymore. We're way beyond that stage. It's again now it's my turn to swear. It's way too fucked up at this point to think of like easy over the counter measures. So yeah, there has to be the decisive and radical change in the way we relate to our environment, and the way we see we approach the natural world. And of course, yeah, your perspective is mostly focused on your experience is mostly focused on Australia, but I'm pretty sure that it will resonate with many people in the audience about their own backyard as well. And now, since we are approaching we're approaching the end of the interview, I still have one more question. But in the meantime, for the audience, please feel free to shoot any question you have for Roslyn in the comments. Let us know what her words made you think about, and what your doubts are, and we will of course try to address every comment. And so, Rose, for the last question, I mean, you knew it was coming. I asked you if it was okay to address this point, because
Yes.
aside from your work in science and in conservation, you are also a model. And so you work in an environment where you have to bring your body under the spotlight, so to say, to sponsor clothing brands and such.
Yep.
And at least you've been very vocal about how this was very poorly received in academic circles. So how this is, especially for young women like yourself, this is seen as unprofessional or demeaning by even respected and self-proclaimed progressive academics.
Yes. It's definitely been something that was quite eye-opening. I mean, I always expected by putting parts of myself like that out there on the internet that I would receive, negative backlash. But what I didn't expect was some of the people that it came from, people that I really respected or admired, or people who hold, really high positions within companies, conservation organizations and things like that. I think the idea that a woman's intelligence or sort of respectability can be reduced because of the fact that she might choose to share selfies or engage in an industry where she makes money from her body, which essentially that's what modeling is. Like, you are paid for your appearance and for what you look like, and that's it. There's no personality or, oh, I like her as a model because she's so smart. Like, that does not come into it at all. It is purely physical. So I guess to be in that realm and then share those parts of yourself online, you do open yourself up to people who disagree with it, people who just take one look at it and dismiss you as a person, which is really disappointing, and I think is a mark of people who've been raised under the patriarchy to believe that, a woman should be ashamed of her body, or a woman, I've had people say things in the vein of, that I would be bringing sexual assault on myself because of what I share online, which I think is completely unacceptable.
Okay,
Um,
this is even worse than I thought.
yeah, so to dismiss a woman based on things like that, I think really is a mark of like low intelligence in the person that's perpetuating that behavior. And like I remember like my father saying to me years ago, you'll never get a job if you post, lingerie photos online. You'll never get a job. You'll never be respected. And as an artist back then, I was like, what's he talking about? Like, I'm never going to be trying to get a respectable job anyway. I'm an artist. Which I guess I have changed my mind on that now. And I don't think I'm going to be a starving artist, living off my work forever, because obviously I've moved on from that. But nowadays, I tend to think of it more in that any organization or any person who would view me as less than because of my modeling or my online presence is not the kind of company that I'd want to work for anyway. And I think that's a good. I mean, once you put things on the internet, you can't take them back. So I have to live with the fact that if people Google my name, there will be like half naked photos that show up. And that's just something that I live with because I've agreed to that and I've put myself out there. But I think anyone that views that and then just instantly goes, nah, we can't employ her, or no, I don't want to work with her. I guess that for me, it's like a screening process because I don't want to work with those people anyway. I think it's ignorant and it's stupid to base your opinions of someone on their private life or the other things that they do outside of work. I think it shows a great deal of closed-mindedness. So yeah, it used to bother me a lot more, and now I've kind of made my peace with it because you can't change people's perception. You can't change people's like really ingrained opinions about what is respectable and what's not. So now I kind of just like throw my hands up in the air and I'm like, whatever.
Oh, but thank you for sharing our story, because like it's definitely something that affects a lot of women in entering any career in science. At least from, of course, I have no direct experience of it, but I've definitely heard episodes like those you just recounted, and even sometimes it even pops up in scientific papers. I remember there was a manuscript published a few months ago where the authors indeed were basically dictating how a woman should behave in order to make it in the academic world, and they basically deemed even sharing photos wearing a bikini at the beach as unprofessional. And I was
Yeah,
like,
I remember that
okay,
article, and
what
it's
the?
like, exactly, it's so sexist. Like any major male scientist, if he posts a shirtless gym photo, the response that would get would be like, "Oh, good on you! Like he's fit and he's got a career and he's healthy and he still finds time to work out. Like what a great guy." Whereas if a woman does it, it's like, "Oh, she's so vain, she's so self-absorbed, she's looking for attention, she needs validation." So it really is an issue on sexism where men can do something and be praised for it, and women do the same thing and are like completely shot down for it. Um, Something that it really gets me fired up.
All right, and as always, we love concluding our interviews by taking jabs at common practice in in the scientific world. So yeah, thank you for this as well, Roslyn, and thank you for being here in the first place. It
My
was
pleasure.
it was, well, yet another enlightening talk, and I'm sure the audience appreciated it a lot as well. We of course wish you all the best on your studies and your work, both with bats and corals. And again, it was a pleasure to have you here. And then for the audience, the Snakeman's Lair will be back next week on April 29th with another incredible guest, Professor Ramesh Punratana from Malaysia, who is a eminent primatologist and former vice president of the IUCN primate specialist group for Southeast Asia. So I hope to see you all there next week. And in the meantime, have a nice weekend.
Awesome. Sounds good. Sounds like a good episode next week.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely sure it will be. All right, so see you soon, everyone, and thank you so much, all of you, for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Lorenzo.
Anytime.